We've worked with contractors across the US, and 9 out of 10 were making these mistakes. If you want better profits and less stress, stay with me. This could change everything for your business. As a contractor, you make your money when you estimate. Because if your estimating is correct, you know that you're going to make money on the back end when you start doing the actual project. So we're running through 10 big mistakes that I see in the industry. The first one, a lot of these I've made myself, so don't think I'm on my high horse here. I've made all of these at one point or the other. First one, though, is free detailed estimates. So the way the contracting landscape is, free estimates are just kind of the way of the road. And it's nice if you can get away from it, but you're going upstream. So there is 3 different types of estimates. There is a ballpark estimate, which you're probably very familiar with. This is where you do some back of the napkin sort of math, and you just get a ballpark estimate. For a new home build, it might be just a square footage of the entire house. You add a little bit here or there, depending on the complexity, and you've got your ballpark estimate. So very easy to do a free ballpark estimate. The next type of estimate is a rough estimate. So this one is where you're working from a template. You've got rough numbers. You're going off just general dimensions and different things like this, but you're not going into like drilled down detail with suppliers, costs, getting bids, all that kind of stuff. So this type of estimate is going to take a little bit longer than the ballpark. And depending on your business model, you could provide this for free as well to do just a bit more value add to the client and sort of position you hopefully above the other contractors, at least on par with the amount of detail that you're putting into the estimate. And once you have the proper system in place for this, doesn't take too long to put a good estimate together. Now, from the rough estimate, that is the only estimate that I would accept as far as giving it away for free. If you are going into like getting pricing from subs or from other contractors, like your sub trades and your suppliers and all this stuff, and you're starting to drill down budget with selections and all that, you need to get paid for that. You need to get a pre-construction service agreement in place so that you're getting paid for the estimating you're doing and all that pre-construction work. I'm not going to get into all of that. I've got other videos on the pre-construction process. You can go check those out after this video. But this is a very important thing. Stop doing detailed free estimating. Figure out what's a quick way you can do estimating, and then have a good qualifying question up front. So you provide the ballpark. This new home that you want is probably going to cost you anywhere from 1 to 1.2 million. Does that seem normal? Does that seem like acceptable for you? And then right away, you can sort of make sure that you're not overestimating, spending tons of time only for the client to come back and say, oh, this is outside of our budget, or what can we do to bring the cost down, all this kind of stuff, right? So very important, save a ton of time, free detailed estimating, get that out of there. Number 2, the big mistake that I see is poor markups, and poor because it's going to keep you poor. And I've done this too. You should not be basing your markups off like the industry standard or what the next guy is doing or how you feel your pricing is compared to your competitors, that sort of thing. You should know right off the bat what your overhead is. So if you don't know what your overhead is, you need to figure that out first, because there's no way you know if you're going to make money with your markups and your margins. And there's a difference. I'm going to tell you in a second here what the difference is. That if you don't know your overhead, you have no idea if you're making money or not during the estimating. So go figure that out. It's very simple. All the non-direct costs that are going, that you have expenses in your company that are not directly tied to a project, you take that, you divide it by your total sales. Typically, you want to do this on the trailing 12-month period. So if it's, June, if it's June right now, you're going to go last year, May to June, or April to May, because you're going to be a little bit behind your bookkeeping, whatever you have, figure out that percentage. Typically, you might think like, oh, it's probably 10% or 15%, but I've seen contractors, they're profitable because they're estimating properly, but their overhead is more like 20 to 25%. So you really don't know until you go dive into the numbers and figure it out. And those small percentages is what eats away your profit, and why you may get to the end of a job or the end of the year and it's like, where's the money? I didn't make any money this year, but I'm marking up all my estimates like 25%. So what's happening here, right? And that's probably a big part of it. So the difference between markup and margin is your margins are going to be lower because margins are a percentage of the total price. Whereas markup it's not the percentage of the total price, it is the markup on top of the price. So there's a difference there. And you can go again. I've got another video specifically on that if you want to dive into that. But typically speaking, if I'm correct, I believe if you have a 25% markup, you're running at about a 20% margin. So if your overhead is 15%, then that only leaves a 5% margin, profit margin potentially. And if something goes sideways on a project, that 5% is out the window, could even run into 10% if something went wrong or you estimated wrong, or this, in the future, you make one of these other 8 mistakes that I've got coming up here. So very easy to lose money by not knowing the difference between margin markup and your overhead. So you need to figure that out. Do not make that mistake. If you want a great template for estimating, I've got templates specifically that have this all kind of line itemed out so that you're not missing anything. So you've got all these a lot of these mistakes can be avoided with having a really nice template. You need the knowledge behind it in order to use the template properly, but check out the link in the description below. I've got free download there with a bunch of templates and an estimating SOP, giving you an estimating system and a plug and play, put in your business. Go get signed up for that now. You'll not regret it. Trust me. All right, moving on to number 3. The third big mistake I see very common is not having project management time in your estimate. Now, it could be construction management, however you want to word it. But a lot of contractors, myself included, when I started out, was just, I've got my 20% markup or whatever, and I'm going to make 10% of profit. And, I didn't even know my overhead, but I just figured that's probably what's going to happen, right? The problem is a number of things. First of all, you don't know how long it's taking you to run a project. So you don't know how many hours you're spending on a typical project. And it's not a good way to estimate a project. Plus, what I mentioned before with your overhead is project management is a direct cost, and it should be a line item in your estimate as a direct cost for that project. And if you just are paying, yourself wages or owner's draw, and you don't really know how much you're spending on project management, your overhead is going to be skewed. You're not going to know your profits accurately. As well as when you have a new project manager who comes in, eventually you're going to grow. If you don't already have project managers, if you do, you need this like yesterday. But if it's just yourself, there's no room for you to hire anybody because you don't know how long things are going to take and you don't know what you need to pay them. So if you've got, $1 million home project and you just have an extra 5% on top of it for project management fees, that may cover it, but it may not, right? So start getting in the habit of like, how many hours is this project going to take? Is it going to take 50 or 100 or 300 hours so that you can then go back later and see, is this accurate? Is this how long it should take? Like how much time I need to organize trades, talk with the client, and go do site checks and quality checks, and all the different things that goes into managing a project effectively needs to be a separate line item. So hopefully you're getting that point across. Moving on, number 4 here. So the fourth big mistake that I see is no digital takeoffs. If you're still working from paper plans or even just on screen and just adding things up yourself from the measurements and dimensions, you need to get away from that. Go get yourself project management software that has takeoff in it, or one of the, side takeoff softwares. There's a bunch of them out there. I've got my top picks. If you want to know, drop a comment below and I'll share with you my top, takeoff softwares that I would recommend. But this is going to do a number of good things for you. First of all, it's going to be quicker. It's going to be easier. Yes, there is some pain up front and you got to get out of your comfort zone because you're going to be having to learn something new. And it's like, oh, this is confusing. You got to watch videos and you're going to make mistakes. It's going to take longer in the beginning. Once you get onto it though, and you've run through a bunch of projects, it's going to be so much faster. Click, drag, drop, figure all this stuff out. Now you've got lists of takeoffs. You can go back. If you ever make a mistake, I had this happen to me where I was doing a full home remodel. I'd estimated the project. We were getting to the drywall stage, got my drywaller in there. He gave me a quote. Usually we were pretty, on the ball because I know his square footage pricing, and typically we didn't need to get a specific quote from our drywall contractor, but his quote came back with an extra, I forget what it was, maybe around $3,000 or something like that, 3-4 grand. I'm like, whoa, what happened? Why is this price so high? And he's like, I don't know. My numbers are correct. Like it's normal pricing. So I was able to go back because I'd used my takeoff software and realized I'd forgotten to include the ceilings. Big mistake. Didn't want to make it again, and made sure that I've got ways to avoid that coming up on some of the next steps. But if I didn't have the takeoff software, I would have not have known which mistake I made, and I would not be able to change the system or change the way I'm estimating to avoid that mistake in the future. And this is like the groundhog day of estimating. If you're ever in that cycle of like you're estimating and then you lose money on a project or you don't have money, and it's like there's this groundhog day project to project, and you can never really figure it out. This is often the key is like you're missing some key information and you're not keeping track of detailed notes or takeoffs, which you need to do with digital takeoff. So make it sense? You still with me here? All right, we're only number 4. And every one of these, like this could be thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on each project. And if you're making a bunch of these mistakes in a row, game over, right? So very important. Number 5, low labor. I would say, typically speaking, a lot of my clients and people that I do see are doing labor quite well, but they don't really understand the dynamics of it. And they kind of cheat the system a little bit, and that can lead into trouble later on. So that's why I have this as a mistake. But for your labor, to figure out the actual cost of labor, you want to be figuring out like all your burden rates. So this is if there's any vacation pay, workers' comp fees, taking the guys out for dinner, lunch every now and then, if you're buying them clothes, if you have to buy tools for them or whatever, right? So figure out what's all the costs that go into having that employee. They may be making $20, $30 an hour, but it's going to cost you 40 to 50 in order for all the admin and overhead and stuff just to have an employee and run payroll and all that stuff that's associated with them, right? So make sure you're calculating that. And then on top of that, you should have another 30 to 40%. So let's say they're making $30 an hour, burden, maybe they're 45, extra 30 to 40%. I don't know what that is, but you should be at least 60 to $70 an hour by now. And then on top of that, you have your markup. So this, and the reason you want that extra 40 to 50% even on top of their burden, like the full cost of them, is because it's so easy to undercalculate the amount of time spent. And it's so easy for time to get out of hand on a project. You have too many guys on site, it gets inefficient. There's bad weather, you open walls and there's, a whole bunch of junk there, or you have safety show up and shut you down for a day. Has happened probably more than once, if you know what I mean. All of this stuff is costing you money. So you need to make sure you're marking up your labor enough to cover all of those kind of contingency things that could happen. So really important. And then as far as like figuring out how many hours things take, I always really like to do like a really clear mental walkthrough in my head of what are they doing, right? So they're going to show up. They've got to unwrap their tools. They've got to get the floor protection out. They've got to set up the poly walls. They've got to cut out these walls. They're probably going to run into some wires or some stuff that they got to move out of the way. Like maybe the client's going to talk with them for what. So just like try to really run through to make sure, and that's how you get an accurate amount of time. It might take a little longer to think through all that, but it's much better than like, oh, they've got to build 3 walls. That should be, I don't know, 3 hours for a wall. That's about a day and a half work, right? That kind of stuff, winging it, you're just going to leave a lot of stuff up to chance of all those extra little things around there that take a lot of extra time. So, all right, moving on here. Number 6, no second eyes. What I mean by this, you need another set of eyes on your estimates, especially on important jobs, big jobs, anything that is significant. Get a second set of eyes to review it for you. An extra 10, 15 minutes could be if you have an estimator or project manager who's estimating for you, way to go. You're ahead of so many people and I congratulate you. You should obviously be looking at those estimates to make sure they're accurate, or somebody else on your team, depending how big of a company you have. But if you are still doing the estimating yourself, you want to have like a project manager, could be a site super, even if you just have like a foreman, somebody else who has some knowledge of construction to take a look at the estimate and just give their second opinion, because they're maybe closer to the field. They're going to maybe see something you don't. Maybe you ran through it. Maybe it was late at night or on a weekend and you just wanted to get out to the lake and go fishing or whatever. So you crammed through a bunch of estimates, right? So have someone else check it for accuracy. Those 10, 15 minutes could save you thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the project, right? So get a second set of eyes on the estimate. Also, if you're working with a designer, it's nice to have a designer in there, or the architect or whoever, because maybe they've put something, or like they didn't put something in the plans that they were thinking of, or you misread the plans or something like that. So it's always nice to have those people in, or selections, things like that, right? So moving on, quick format here. We got 10, got a few more to go here. Make sure you stay tuned and get that link in the description and really go sign up, get the free templates and the SOP. They will give you a huge boost in your estimating system and help you avoid a bunch of these mistakes right out of the gate. So number 7, already on number 7 here. So outdated pricing. Don't use pricing from previous estimates. If you've got a template, make sure you're updating that pricing pretty much every time you're estimating, unless you're doing like a lot of estimates. But every month or 2 months, you should be updating the pricing of your templates. Typically, you're going to do this while you're estimating another project. And if you're using another project as a template, make sure that you know when that project was done. If you're using a project from a year ago and now you're recycling it, which I wouldn't suggest, work from a template, but if you are, make sure you update the pricing because the pricing is probably old. Also, if the project is in the future, so if you're bidding on a new home build and you know that they don't even have the land yet, or they've just purchased the land and they've got to go for all this, planning or permits or all this stuff, and it's probably 8 months before you start that project, you can estimate it. Just make sure they're very clear that this pricing will probably change and you'll have to revise it when you get to there. But at the very least, be thinking ahead a little bit. You don't want to, give them huge sticker shock and like inflate all your pricing by 5%, even though inflation is probably going to be 5 or 10% in a year. So, but be aware of that. Don't use old pricing and make sure you're thinking about inflation for the future if there's a long time frame before you get started. Number 8. All right. Number 8 is rushing. You know me, rapid results. I like to rush. I like to get things done. Let's get it done. Let's move on, right? But I've learned in my old age and my experience that sometimes you need to chill a little bit. You need to take a little bit of a breather and really think things through. So when you finish an estimate, if you've rushed through it, make sure you take 15 minutes just to like take a step back and like, what am I missing here? Does this all make sense? Look at it again. And even while you're going through it, you want to work at a natural pace. If you're going really fast and just trying to throw numbers together, that extra 10 minutes you might save on the estimate or 15 minutes on the estimate, again, could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. And I think for most people, most contractors out there, if they're getting $10,000, every 10, 15 minutes of work that they're doing pretty well. So it's worth your time to take a little bit of time, do the estimate properly. Spend the time on building a better estimating system. Don't spend the time on, trying to gain and rush through your estimates. So no rushing and don't copy from other jobs. Like I mentioned, that's a rush move. Set up a template, do it right the first time. All right, moving on to number 9, no contingencies. So another common mistake is not having any kind of contingency in place. And again, often most contractors will say, well, my contingency is in my markup, right? Have it as a line item so you know about it, so you're prepared for it and you can understand it. And you could even have this open to the client again, depending how you structure things you want to be. But if you're like, after I add these contingencies and these labor markups and this extra margins and markups and like pricing and all this stuff, I'm just going to scare off all my clients. And I can't operate at these kind of margins or markups or whatever. So put it in there and just let the client know we've included a 5% contingency. It's not in the bottom price, but you can expect probably this will come up at some point, and we've got it in there. If we don't need it, we will do our best to return like that money to you. But typically speaking, that 5% contingency does get spent at some time, at some point, as a miscellaneous or whatever. So you could have as a miscellaneous, you could have it as contingency, whatever it may be. Put it in there, let the client know, and explain why you have that in there. All right. So, and contingencies, there's so many things that can go wrong. It's just going to happen. And what I've mentioned before with the markups, I wouldn't go and jump your pricing super high right away. If you're operating like, let's say a 15% markup or something like that, and you're like, wow, like you realize now with the margins and everything, I need to be at like 25% or 30%. Doing that overnight, you may see a kind of a nosedive of like landed projects that you're closing. So better to kind of ratchet it up. And depending on how busy you are, if you've got like leads coming in left, right, and center, definitely raise your price. and your markups to make profitable margins and all that kind of stuff. But if it's a little bit sparse, raise it maybe 2% or 3%. 5% typically you won't see, won't influence your closing rate, but it depends on the projects and your clients and all that kind of stuff. Just a little bit of side info there. All right, final one here. Number 10 is not learning from mistakes. If you need to be doing job costing and know your estimated to actuals. Talked about the Groundhog Day, that hamster wheel of life. Just keep making the same mistakes, keep not, being profitable. What's happening here? This is not an easy system to get set up. It's easy. There's an easy way to do it, but the problem is that there's a technical side to it, and then there's a difficult like people side to it of actually habitual things that people need to do in order to do proper job costing. If you can't get specific job costing to the level of like, how much do we spend on framing? How much do we spend on flooring? How much do we spend on roofing? If you're not there yet, that's fine. At the very least, start getting expenses and your hours tied to the project. So at least at the end of the project, I spent this much, we invoiced this much. What's the difference, right? Start there. At some point, though, the golden goose is going to be job costing and being able to know specifically what got spent on different parts of the project, because then you can start to see patterns and you can start to see where your estimating is out line item by line item. So super important. As I mentioned, if you want some great templates and an SOP for estimating, hit the link in the description below. Go get signed up. I will see you on the next video.